Operation Midway Blitz is now underway, an immigration crackdown in Chicago announced by the White House. President Trump promises a wave of deportations. The Supreme Court releases two major decisions. One lifts restrictions on immigration-related stops, allowing what critics call blatant racial profiling, while the second says Trump does have the power to fire an FTC commissioner. And Jeffrey Epstein's 2003 birthday book is handed over to Congress, including a letter allegedly signed by Donald Trump. We'll talk to someone who has covered Epstein's criminal web for decades. Hello, I'm Nancy Cordes in Washington. Major Garrett is on assignment. Welcome to The Takeout. President Trump has been vowing a crackdown in Chicago for weeks and weighing whether to send in the National Guard to combat what he calls out-of-control crime. Well, today, the White House announced a different action in Illinois. ICE agents will target undocumented immigrants who they say also have criminal records. The Department of Homeland Security took aim at Governor J.B. Pritzker in their announcement about what they're calling Operation Midway Blitz, claiming that his sanctuary policies have allowed criminals to roam free. Trump's threat to deploy troops is not yet a reality, but the city of Chicago is on guard for that shoe to drop. White House correspondent Weijia Jiang has the latest on this immigration crackdown and what the president is saying about taking further action. Weijia, it is so great to see you. So what do we know about Operation Midway Blitz? How extensive is this new crackdown?
Well, Nancy, I just spoke with the border czar for the Trump administration, Tom Homan, just a couple minutes ago, and I asked him exactly that. How does this operation, Midway Blitz in Chicago and Operation Patriot in Boston, change the operations on the ground? Does it mean a surge of ICE agents? Does it mean the National Guard is moving in to help bolster their efforts? And he really was not able to provide any specifics about how this changes. In fact, he said, look, this is something we've been doing for months now, targeting the worst of the worst, targeting the bad guys, the criminals who are in this country illegally. And so he was not able to answer exactly what has changed now that they've slapped a formal name on these, but they do insist that there will be more to be done to go after these criminals, Nancy.
Interesting. So details are still scant. The president did speak about possibly deploying National Guard troops to Chicago. Weijia, let's listen to what he had to say.
We'd love to go into Chicago and straighten it out. You know, Washington, D.C., you'll be happy to know, is a free and safe zone. It's so safe right now.
So, Weijia, it sounds like he hasn't yet decided whether he's sending National Guard troops to the Windy City or not.
Right. He's keeping the option open, Nancy. And it's interesting because last week he said, you know, I wish that they would call me. I'm waiting for them to call, but we're going to do it no matter what. It's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when. But just this morning, he repeated again that he wished Chicago would call him up because they are standing ready to assist. But Chicago and state leaders have made so crystal clear, Nancy, that they do not want this federal assistance. So the question is whether the administration is going to move forward anyway. That's something I also asked Homan. I said, when are these national troops going to be going to cities like Boston and Chicago? And Tom Homan said, well, I never said that they were. And we certainly aren't going to broadcast it before they do because it's such a sensitive operation. So basically, to your point, they're leaving the door open, but we do not know when and if they will actually walk through it.
And obviously, they'd face a big legal headache if they sent National Guard troops somewhere that they weren't wanted. Weijia Jiang, senior White House correspondent, thank you so much. Supreme Court Chief Justice John Roberts is allowing President Trump to remove a member of the Federal Trade Commission. The firing of Rebecca Slaughter will remain in effect for now while the court decides whether to take up the case. CBS News legal contributor and Loyola Law School professor Jessica Levinson joins me now. Jessica, it's great to see you. You know, most Americans don't spend a lot of time worrying about who sits on the Federal Trade Commission. So can you explain the overarching significance of the Supreme Court saying, yes, this is a quasi-independent agency, but President Trump can potentially remove the Democratic commissioner anyway?
You did most of the work for me there because you teed this up exactly. One, we should note that this is just an administrative stay. Chief Justice John Roberts has said, I want more briefing from Slaughter's attorneys by September 15th. So this isn't a final ruling on the merits. But you asked me basically about the big legal question we're struggling with. And I think it's, again, does the president have the power at its most basic level? But a little bit further down in more detail, does the president have the power to fire the heads of executive agencies? And as you correctly pointed out, these kind of quasi-independent executive agencies. And what the court is going to struggle with next term is the question of whether there can be any limits on the president's ability to fire people, or if the president can just fire people essentially at will. And if there are limits, then what are those limits? What does the president have to show? Does the president have to show, for instance, that there's malfeasance? And of course, we're having the same conversation with respect to Lisa Cook, who's a board member at the Fed.
Right. And the significance here is that when it comes to independent agencies like the FTC or the FCC, they have Democratic members and Republican commissioners. And if you can get rid of the Democrats for no reason, then you're kind of eliminating the built-in opposition to whatever the majority wants to do, right?
Well, that's right. On a broader level, it means that the president can ensure that he not only gets appointments, but that he can remove people at will and essentially make sure that the people who staff these positions, or I should say the people who lead these agencies, are loyalists to the president and to his administration. That would be a significant change because we previously understood that a lot of these agencies do have not just some independents, but as you said, that there's Democrat members and Republican members as well.
Right.
And of course, we see on the screen.
Yeah.
Sorry.
And it's no small feat to get a new member appointed if one gets fired or let go. It takes time to go through the confirmation process. I do want to switch gears, though, and ask you about another big win for the Trump administration today, because the Supreme Court also allowed it to resume sweeping immigration enforcement stops in the Los Angeles area. Remind us why the lower courts had blocked those stops in the first place.
Yeah, so I'm speaking to you from Los Angeles, where one of our district court judges, Judge Frimpong, had heard a challenge by those who were saying that the way ICE agents were enforcing federal immigration law was problematic. And specifically, under the Fourth Amendment, you need a reasonable suspicion before you detain somebody and, for instance, question them based on their immigration status. Judge Frimpong said you can't rely alone or together on four different factors: race or the color of somebody's skin, the language they're speaking or whether or not they're speaking with an accent, where they are, and the job they're doing. She said that bucket of factors, it's not enough to give rise to reasonable suspicion. So ICE agents basically stop what you're doing. You need more before you detain people. The Supreme Court today put that ruling, that temporary restraining order, on hold while the case plays out.
Jessica Levinson with that expert legal analysis. Thank you so much. And now let's turn to the practical implications with Camilo Montoya Galvez. Camilo, great to see you. So what does this mean, practically speaking, for those immigration stops that were taking place in Los Angeles? Does it mean they can resume immediately? And can they take place in the rest of the country as well?
Hi, Nancy. This is yet another legal victory for President Trump's sweeping crackdown on illegal immigration. As Jessica underscored, this lower court ruling that was paused today and suspended by the High Court prohibited federal immigration officials from Border Patrol and also Immigration and Customs Enforcement from conducting indiscriminate raids that relied on certain factors such as somebody's race, ethnicity, their occupation as a day laborer, for example, or their presence in a location like a Home Depot parking lot. And those are the operations that triggered a lot of controversy in Southern California, targeting day laborers outside of Home Depots and workers suspected of being in the country illegally in different work sites across Southern California. While the case was only applicable to that region of the country in California, this high court decision, Nancy, could very well undermine other lawsuits that advocates in other states and cities could file against immigration enforcement actions in places like Chicago and Boston. We know that those two Democratic-led cities are now in the crosshairs of the Trump administration's immigration crackdown and could very well see an increase in immigration agents conducting operations in those jurisdictions, Nancy.
Camilo, I want to ask you about another big immigration story with new developments, and that's this huge raid that took place at the Hyundai plant in Georgia. Over the weekend, the South Korean government said that hundreds of workers there who were from South Korea were going to be released, and that the Trump administration was going to allow them to fly home. What do we know about those individuals? Were they all here in the U.S. illegally? And what more can you tell us about what happens now?
Well, Nancy, the Trump administration in many ways is still dealing with the diplomatic fallout from this large-scale operation, which the Department of Homeland Security says is the largest single-site immigration operation, in the history of that department. 475 workers were detained. They are suspected of having worked in the U.S. illegally. More than 300 of them are Korean nationals, according to officials. And this, in many ways, blindsided leaders in South Korea who almost immediately expressed concerns about the legal rights of their citizens being respected here in the U.S. Now we know that that country's government will be sending a charter plane here to the U.S. to pick up the South Korean detainees who have decided to voluntarily return to South Korea. Nancy, that importantly would potentially avoid having those citizens languish in ICE custody indefinitely and facing legal and civil penalties because of those allegations that they were working in the U.S. illegally. Importantly, 23 of the workers have also been identified to be Mexican nationals, and the Mexican government has also said that many of them have agreed to return to Mexico voluntarily and that those repatriations could happen in the coming days, Nancy.
Okay, it's just creating new tension between the U.S. and South Korea over manufacturing here in the United States. Camilo Montoya Galvez, thank you so much. Appreciate it. Still to come, polling on presidential powers. We've got new numbers on everything from tariffs to deploying the National Guard. And ask the doctor what you need to know about the controversy brewing over reports that the health secretary is about to announce a potential link between autism and Tylenol. And House investigators are now in possession of that infamous Epstein birthday book. What we could learn from the latest document drop. The Takeout returns in 90 seconds. The Republican-led House Oversight Committee today received materials from the Epstein estate as part of its investigation into the late convicted sex offender. Among them, a book that allegedly contains an explicit birthday message from Donald Trump to Jeffrey Epstein. According to the note, the president allegedly wrote to Epstein, quote, "May every day be another wonderful secret." President Trump has denied writing that letter. Barry Levine joins us now. He's the author of the book, The Spider, Inside the Criminal Web of Jeffrey Epstein and Ghislaine Maxwell. Barry, so great to see you. Thank you for being with us. So what's your reaction to the fact that this letter has now seen the light of day? Even today, the White House is insisting President Trump did not write it.
Well, thank you for having me on, Nancy. I do think that this puts President Trump in a bit of a pickle here today with the release from the estate of the letter. I mean, frankly, this letter was to some degree much ado about nothing, in the sense that we knew that Donald Trump was friends with Jeffrey Epstein back in 2003. That is well known. He might have written something for this birthday book. It doesn't allege any wrongdoing, but the story blew up because Donald Trump denied it to such a great degree and filed a lawsuit against the Wall Street Journal. And so that ballooned the story. Now we actually have the Oversight Committee receiving that document. that birthday book from the estate, and it's quite clear. I mean, Donald Trump's signature, it should be noted, has changed over the years. This was back in 2003. The next year, he went on The Apprentice. He wrote a few books. He was signing a lot of books at that time, and his signature changed. But this signature matches up to his handwriting at the time, circa 2003. So it does look legitimate to me. But if this lawsuit continues, of course, there'll be great scrutiny from forensic handwriting experts and lawyers over whether or not this signature is in fact true.
What could we learn that we don't know already if the rest of this birthday book is released publicly?
Well, I think what we'll learn, of course, are who were the people that were very close to Jeffrey Epstein at the time. We know for a fact that Leslie Wexner, who was the founder of L Brands, and Jeffrey Epstein was power of attorney for Mr. Wexner and did a lot of financial dealings for Mr. Wexner, that he is also allegedly in this birthday book, along with some other people. I'm actually more interested in some of the additional documents that the Oversight Committee subpoenaed from the Epstein estate. They include his last will and testament, which Jeffrey Epstein changed his will 2 days before his death behind bars. There's also financial records. There's copies of material that was signed by Jeffrey Epstein between him and the prosecutors of that infamous non-prosecution agreement in Florida back in 2008, and the financial records. And to me, that's extremely significant, so we could see whether or not there were possible financial crimes, because Jeffrey Epstein had 158 bank accounts, and he was using money to send money to victims and also enablers in foreign countries. So there's a lot of good material in the documents that are being turned over.
And the members of Congress who are leading the charge in this discharge petition, basically the move to get all of the Epstein files unsealed, they say they are getting very close to 218, the votes that they would need to be successful. At that point, is there anything that the administration can do or that the House Speaker can do to prevent these files from being made public?
Well, I have to say that the Trump administration is been putting up a fight not to release the files. I was in Washington last week at the victims' press conference where these courageous women stood and asked for transparency. The government owes these women, the victims in this horrible case, the documents, the transparency. Some of them told me after the press conference that they want the government to show them documents that are related directly to them, and the government is holding all this back. So I do hope that the lawmakers who are involved with this get the vote, and they continue to push the administration and the Department of Justice to release the files, not only for the victims, but for the country, so we could see exactly if there are individuals, third parties, who were associated with Jeffrey Epstein that need to be investigated.
Yeah, that would open a real can of worms. There's a lot of people who want to see what's in those files. Barry Levine, thank you so much for sharing your insight with us. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Nancy.
President Trump has already deployed the National Guard in Los Angeles and Washington, D.C., but as he considers other cities, how do Americans feel about that? We've got some new CBS News polling. It's really interesting. We'll talk about it next here on The Takeout. Welcome back to The Takeout. Here's a look at what else we're watching this evening. Today, President Trump called the man who allegedly murdered a Ukrainian refugee on a Charlotte train a, quote, lunatic. 23-year-old Irina Zarutska was fatally stabbed last month during a seemingly random attack. The story gaining national attention after gruesome surveillance video was released over the weekend. The suspect has been charged with first-degree murder. President Trump says he's going to speak with Vladimir Putin in the coming days. It comes after Russia launched its biggest aerial attack since the start of the war in Ukraine.
Look, we're going to get it done. The Russia-Ukraine situation, we're going to get it done. I have confidence we're going to get it done.
Ukrainian officials also say Russia killed at least 2 people and damaged a key government building after firing more than 800 drones and decoys into the nation over the weekend. Well, just how much power should a U.S. president have? That's the question Americans grappled with in our new CBS News poll. For example, when it comes to President Trump deploying the National Guard to Washington, D.C., a majority opposes it. And 58% say they wouldn't approve of a plan to send the troops into other cities. CBS News Executive Director of Elections and Surveys, Anthony Salvanto, joins me now. Anthony, it is great to see you. What else are people saying about how much power an American president should have?
Great to talk to you, Nancy. Yeah, not just with the National Guard, but you think about so many of the issues that are in play today, right? Deportations, talking about also who can impose tariffs, influence over the Federal Reserve. All of those things speak to that larger issue you said at the top. How much power should a president have, right? We asked that in general in this poll, and 2/3 of Americans say they do see Donald Trump, in their view, trying to increase presidential powers. Now, I should add, Republicans don't think so. They think he's trying to keep them the same, but a lot of his detractors say that he is. But then it's, how do you describe that generally? Well, take a look at this party breakdown. For Democrats, yeah, he's trying to get the federal government, make the federal government more under his direct control. But for Republicans, he's trying to make the federal government more efficient. So when we talk about power, we're also talking about how they interpret getting things done, how they see that power being used. And yes, that then segues into things like whether or not he can or should deploy the National Guard, which you said at the top is one of those things Republicans very much in favor, but the rest of the country more opposed.
So one of the things you did that was very interesting with this poll is you looked at how Americans judge the president's goals versus the steps he's taking to achieve those goals. What did you find?
Which speaks to that same idea. And you see this gap, right? 47% said they like his goals, what he wants to accomplish. And if you think about that issue by issue, sure, people want a strong economy. People want to be safe from crime, right? They tell us that. But more dislike the way he's going about it. And that's the process. So in a general way, again, you string through all these various issues. These are the big picture things that it tells you that Americans are starting to wrestle with and trying to wrestle with. I come back to the National Guard as an example of that, right? Mm-hmm. Take a look at, very quickly, does deploying the Guard to cities reduce crime? Republicans all think so. They would even say they'd welcome the National Guard in their area. But Democrats think it doesn't. That's effectiveness, and it speaks to that larger idea of goals versus approach, Nancy.
Right. So people like the idea of reducing crimes, but a majority of them don't like the idea of the National Guard sitting in their cities to do it. Anthony Salvanto, thank you so much. Really fascinating.
Thank you.
The vice president and Republican Senator Rand Paul clash over a deadly U.S. military strike on an alleged drug boat in the Caribbean. Our reporter panel has more next on The Takeout. Stick around. Welcome back to The Takeout. Kentucky Republican Senator Rand Paul had some harsh words for Vice President Vance over the administration's military actions against cartel members. The U.S. conducted an airstrike against a suspected drug vessel leaving Venezuela last week. And Vice President Vance said afterwards on social media that killing cartel members is the, quote, best use of our military. Senator Paul responded over the weekend, quote, did he ever read To Kill a Mockingbird? Did he ever wonder what might happen if the accused were immediately executed without trial or representation? To talk about this, we have Tyler Kendall and Riley Rogerson. Tyler is a Washington correspondent at Bloomberg. Riley is a reporter for Notice. Welcome to both of you. Thank you for being here.
Thanks for having me.
So, Riley, let's start with this controversy, which is kind of spicy when you consider the fact that these are two, one is a Republican senator now, one was his Republican colleague, and, you know, they don't usually go at each other in this way.
Absolutely. This term, we've seen barely any Republican senators try to stand up to the Trump administration. So the fact we're seeing Rand Paul, who is such a fiscal hawk, a conservative, someone potentially the Trump administration could try to make an ally out of, they really haven't. And now we're seeing him go after the Trump administration in no uncertain terms. I mean, have you read To Kill a Mockingbird? To J.D. Vance, who is a trained lawyer, is pretty aggressive. So it definitely puts a spotlight on Rand Paul as an interesting character in this GOP Senate.
And Tyler, if there is a Republican who is going to go after the Republican administration, it is Rand Paul. He's probably at the top of the list. But it does shine a light on some of the potential pitfalls for the administration as it continues to prosecute this new fight against cartels using the military to make it happen.
Definitely. And in fact, Nancy, the administration said that this is just the start of these attacks. So there's a few different threads that we could pull on when it comes to that. One, of course, are the legal questions here. Also, when we're talking about members of Congress, were they adequately briefed on this operation? But the second, what does this tell us about the administration's future policies when it comes towards going after these cartels, but also its policies towards Venezuela? And our analysts at Bloomberg Economics actually just released an analysis that says this administration has been left with some pretty limited economic policy tools here. And perhaps that's why we're seeing them move to these other areas, including asset seizures or now military moves.
I want to ask you both about this new controversy over the ICE raid at this Hyundai plant, one of the biggest projects, if not the biggest, in Georgia. On one hand, it does sound like there were some immigration problems that had already been flagged at that facility. On the other hand, this administration has made a very big deal about the fact that it wants to encourage foreign investment, foreign manufacturing in the United States. And now we see those two things potentially coming into conflict, Tyler.
Right, exactly. And this is definitely casting a shadow over South Korea's multi-billion-dollar investment drive in this country, which is really underpinning the ongoing trade negotiations. And Hyundai's been a really big part of that. In fact, it's already pledged $26 billion in U.S. investment through 2028. It's also probably worth pointing out that this was an electric vehicle battery plant, and the administration has identified those really key sectors that they say they want to de-risk, not necessarily decouple, but de-risk. And we know China has a really big grip when it comes to the EV supply chain. Now, this week, I'm watching really closely whether or not this really does impact those trade negotiations. South Korean officials are expected to be here in Washington to continue them because, as you all know, South Korea was able to secure that more preferential rate of 15%, but it hasn't gone into effect yet on autos. And part of that is because we are still waiting on those key details on what a $350 billion investment pledge fund is going to look like, which brings us back to the whole premise of the question here, which is really that South Korea has been trying to get this investment into the U.S. in order to score these better rates on the levies.
Right, and you wonder what other foreign companies from other countries are thinking as they watch what's going down in Georgia. Riley, I want to switch gears before we go and play a little bit of this ad that was released over the weekend from Michigan Democratic Senate candidate Mallory McMorrow. It's been getting a lot of attention. She's talking about affordability. Take a listen.
This is just the latest example of corporate greed ruining the things we love. Because it's not just commercials on TV. It's also your grocery store run, where chicken wings are going to cost you 19 bucks.
So Democrats have really struggled, I think, to break through with messages on the president's tariffs and potentially a rise in inflation as a result of his economic policy. What do you make of her approach, and is that kind of the key for Democrats when it comes to breaking through?
Well, it seems like it's going to be a smart strategy to be talking about football on opening weekend of the NFL.
Question.
That was probably went over well with people in Michigan. But what strikes me about it is Democrats have, kind of raked themselves over the coals for the past 6 to 8 months of, we have an authenticity problem. We need to be connecting with the average or any American, people who like football, people who drink beer. And so many Democrats have complained they're just talking in consultant speak. So I think an ad like this is showing Democrats talking to just the type of people that they want to win over in upcoming elections. So that's what really struck me about that ad.
Yeah, and in order to be successful, you have to be able to pull off the authentic message and to look like you really know football before you start talking about it.
Definitely. And we also know, of course, that underpinning this message was the one about economic anxiety. And when we look at, I believe, CBS News' own polling, that the One Big Beautiful Bill isn't really polling that well. So perhaps we're going to see Democrats capitalize on that. But at the same time, our Bloomberg News polling repeatedly showed us during the campaign trail that President Trump did exceedingly well when it came to the issues of the economy. And now we're starting to see perhaps those fissures play out.
Very interesting. Tyler Kendall, Riley Rogerson, thank you so much for being here. Appreciate it. Well, a new report is sparking some confusion for pregnant women. It says that the health secretary is gearing up to warn of a possible link between autism and one of the world's most popular pain relievers. But what does the science actually say? We're going to dig into that next. You're watching The Takeout. The Wall Street Journal is reporting that the Department of Health and Human Services is going to soon release a report suggesting that pregnant women's use of Tylenol might be linked to autism. HHS Secretary Robert F. Kennedy Jr. has yet to confirm whether or not this is the case, but we are going to get into it in a moment. Take a listen to what he said so far.
As soon as we have enough information to give to the public with confidence, we are going to do that. But anything that happens, any speculation about what's in those reports at this point is speculative.
Dr. Francesca Haydanek, who is an OB/GYN, joins me now to discuss. So, doctor, let's get right to the point. Is there any known link between autism and Tylenol?
So I think it's really important to think about what the word link is when we're using it in science. A link is an association, but an association is not causation. So there are studies out there that show that there is an association between the use of Tylenol in pregnancy and neurodevelopmental disorders like autism and ADHD. But none of these studies show that Tylenol causes these issues. And that's why it's so important that we continue to listen to those words of link and association. And remember, very importantly, that this does not mean that it causes those problems.
So what would explain the potential link between the two? And what would the problem be with going a step further, as the Wall Street Journal is reporting, and actually stating, the government stating, that there is this potential causation?
So we have to think about why pregnant patients will be taking Tylenol. Sometimes they have a fever. So is it the Tylenol use that is causing these issues, or is it the actual fever that the Tylenol was used for? Same with pains that patients have that the Tylenol is used for. Is that underlying condition that is causing pain maybe responsible for those changes, or is it the Tylenol? And it's really hard to know that in the research that we do. The type of studies that are done mostly on pregnant patients don't do those kind of studies where you can say it causes it. And that's why it can be problematic if we say there's an association without saying that there's an actual cause from Tylenol causing these neurodevelopmental disorders.
So what do you currently recommend to your patients who are pregnant when it comes to Tylenol use? And is that going to change if the health secretary publicizes this link?
So I always recommend to my patients that we use Tylenol as indicated. So we shouldn't just be taking Tylenol for no reason. We should always start with non-pharmaceutical issues first. How do we get a fever to come down? How do we manage pain with non-medications? And then we move on to Tylenol, because we know that there are benefits. And especially in situations of pain or a fever, those benefits are going to go outweigh those risks. I'm not going to change how I use Tylenol for my pregnant patients. It's still a judicious use of this medication. And until I can see the studies where it shows that Tylenol causes these neurodevelopmental disorders, I'm not going to change how I prescribe Tylenol.
Do you have more patients coming in to see you with questions about vaccines, with concerns about vaccines, given that the health secretary is a skeptic when it comes to some very prominent vaccines and, and maybe stirring up some fears and concerns?
I think what we're more seeing currently is patients being concerned that they won't have access to those vaccinations. If the vaccinations are no longer recommended by the CDC, some insurance companies will no longer pay for it. And so that's mostly what I'm seeing is my patients are concerned that they won't have access to it, mostly for financial reasons, less so based on the discussions that he's having.
Some really great insights, Doctor. Thank you so much for being with us, Dr. Francesca Haydanek. I really appreciate it.
Thank you so much.
2 New England states are taking the Trump administration to court after it orders work to stop on an offshore wind farm. What one of those states' attorney generals has to say about the move, next on The Takeout. Connecticut and Rhode Island are suing the Trump administration over its decision to halt work on a nearly completed offshore wind farm. Major Garrett recently sat down with Rhode Island's Attorney General for more on that lawsuit. Listen.
Mr. Attorney General, thanks for joining us. I appreciate your time. Tell my audience what Revolution Wind Project is, who it serves, and what its future is now.
Yeah, so Revolution Wind Major is a wind energy project off the coast of Rhode Island, about 12 to 15 miles off the Rhode Island coast. It's intended to provide clean, reliable wind energy that would power 350,000 homes in Rhode Island and Connecticut. This is a project that has been in the making for nearly a decade. 80% of it is complete. The cables are laid back from the turbines to the shore. Nearly all of them are done. The interconnection points on the mainland are done. Nearly all of the turbines themselves are up. The foundations for all of them are installed. And so this is a project that has been underway for a long time. Went through all the necessary federal and state approvals over the course, as I said, of a decade. And the Trump administration abruptly stopped the project back on August 22nd with a stop work order, which gave no basis for that stop work order because it wasn't possible to give one. As a result, Attorney General William Tong of Connecticut and myself have filed a lawsuit in federal district court here in Rhode Island to turn that project back on as soon as possible to make sure that that necessary energy, particularly in our part of the country, New England, which we need wind energy. There's no question we need it. We need that project turned on and completed. It's supposed to be completed by next year. We need that to happen.
On what basis and through what jurisdictional powers did the Trump administration issue this stop work order?
Well, they cited a federal statute, which is the name is really too long and incomprehensible to share with your viewers. But the bottom line is they control, the Department of Interior controls the continental shelf in terms of permitting. That same agency issued a permit, as I said, after nearly 9 years of reviews and environmental impact statements and what have you, including a national security analysis. And there were no problems found. There's no basis in that one-page stop work order, a little over a page, that says anything about how the permit already issued has been violated, how conditions have changed. And again, none of that's in there because it's not possible to put that in there. There's no basis for stopping the project other than the Trump administration's head-on assault of wind energy, because for whatever reason, it's under the president's hat, if you will, and he can't get it out of his head that it's a bad thing, notwithstanding all the evidence to the contrary.
What is the community support or opposition to this project?
Well, look, I think what Rhode Islanders really care about, if you go down to brass tacks, is how expensive our energy is. I haven't met a constituent over my nearly 7 years as Attorney General who hasn't been concerned about their electric bill or their gas bill. The reason that they're so concerned is obviously because the prices are high. Those prices are high because we are at the end of the gas pipeline system. A lot of the other sources of energy have been taken offline, coal, for example, necessarily so. But the fact of the matter is the coal burning plant in neighboring Massachusetts has come offline. And so we need to replace that energy and replace it with clean energy that will protect our future and our children's future and our grandchildren's future. And the way to do that, in part, is with wind energy. And so I believe, based on my experience here, that the vast majority of Rhode Islanders support this project. Look, there are some who wish their ocean views did not have a wind turbine 15 miles away, but the vast majority of Rhode Islanders, myself included, don't have ocean viewscapes. And short of a few of those people, most people want reliable energy. And our grid operator, ISO New England, put out a statement last week that we need this wind energy to keep our grid stable. And Rhode Islanders want a stable grid. You know, when we have a hurricane up here or we have other storms, we want our grid to be stable, and this is a big part of it.
Mr. Attorney General, it's my assumption that a stop work order from the federal government does exactly that, stops work. So how rapidly do you imagine you can obtain, if successful, a legal remedy to restart this?
Well, look, Major, presumably very quickly. We've asked for and we'll be asking for injunctive relief, preliminary injunctive relief. And what that's designed to do for your viewers is get a court order from a federal district court judge here in Rhode Island very quickly that will force the administration to withdraw that stop work order and let this project proceed. We brought a number of cases here in Rhode Island, my fellow attorneys general and myself, both here and around the country, but we've brought more than a handful here, 5, 6, 7, 8 in that range here. We've been successful in all of them. All of them have involved unlawful acts by the Trump administration that have harmed Rhode Islanders and Americans. I anticipate having the same success here because what the law says, it's very clear, Major, is that when you make a decision, when you're an agency, whether you're a state or federal agency, what the Administrative Procedures Act says is you've got to make findings and you've got to apply the law. You can't just make decisions out of the blue or change pre-existing decisions out of the blue. Why? Because whether you're an industry or you're Rhode Islanders or the people of Connecticut that are relying on this energy, you have a reliance interest in it. And when the government changes direction like this in a way that doesn't make any sense and isn't based on facts of the law, then those reliance interests are harmed. And furthermore, it's going to be very hard to get anybody to invest in anything if they believe that the government can simply change course in this irrational way. And that's why we're very confident with a project that's 80% complete. Remember, this project is not in somebody's head. It's not written down on paper. Construction is nearly done, and it makes no sense not to bring this project online.
Rhode Island Attorney General Peter Nerona, I thank you very much for your time, sir. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Major.
That does it for the Takeout today. For Major Garrett, I'm Nancy Cordes. He'll be back tomorrow. Stick around for now. The Daily Report starts now.